Hey guys, welcome back to the Mark series. My name is Katie and this is Mark chapter 9, the Transfiguration of Jesus. Jesus takes his three closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, and goes up high on a mountain to pray. And as he is on the mountain praying, suddenly his face becomes altered. His robes become glistening. It's a white as pure as light, as pure as snow, glistening, dazzling off of his clothes. And the disciples, Peter, James, and John, are heavy with sleep. But when they are awake, they see Jesus in this altered, different, glorious form, and they see his glory. Now, standing with Jesus is Moses and Elijah, and they are also in their glorious form. So the disciples see Jesus in his glory, and they see Moses and Elijah in their glory as well. And Moses, he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy. And Elijah was a great prophet of the Old Testament. Interesting fact about Elijah is that he never died. A chariot of fire came from heaven and took him up. And Moses and Elijah both lived hundreds of years ago, yet here they are in their glorious form on this mountain for Peter, James, and John to see. And they recognize Moses as Moses and Elijah as Elijah, even though they lived hundreds of years before and they would have never have met and they are not introduced. And so it is interesting to see that they recognize Moses and Elijah, and it's a good thing for us to know that when we die and our heavenly glorious bodies will be able to recognize each other. And so Elijah and Moses are talking to Jesus, and what they are talking about is the fact that Jesus is going to die soon. So they're talking about his coming departure, that Jesus is going to die soon, but then he's going to rise from the dead and he's going to ascend to heaven. And so that's what they're talking about up on this mountain. And Peter, as he sees that Elijah and Moses are departing, he says to Jesus, let's make 3 tabernacles, one for you, Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And a tabernacle, a tent or dwelling place, it's almost as if he wants them to stay a little longer in their glorious form. And then suddenly a great cloud comes and overshadows Peter, James, and John, and they hear a voice. And this voice scares them to death, where they are terrified when they hear this voice. It's the voice of God. God Almighty, the great I Am, is speaking, and they hear his voice and they are so afraid they drop down onto their faces. And this is what God the Father says from heaven. He says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Listen to what he has to say. Do what he wants you to do. I am affirming him right now. Now, Jesus had already been affirmed by his Father earlier at the baptism of Jesus. That is when God spoke an audible voice and said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." And this time he is reaffirming Jesus, but he is adding, listen to him. Listen to him. And as the disciples are on the ground, the voice from heaven stops. Jesus touches them, says, "Do not be afraid." And they lift up their eyes and they see that no longer is Elijah and Moses standing there, but they are gone. It is only Jesus. And Jesus tells them, "Do not speak of this until after the Son of Man has risen from the dead." And as they are walking along, they start wondering amongst themselves, what does that mean to rise from the dead? And so we have seen this monumental climax in the life of Jesus, because what's going to happen next is the fact that Jesus will be crucified, he will rise from the dead, he will ascend into heaven. So this is the climax point where the disciples are reminded again that this is not just an ordinary man. This is the Son of God. This is the Jesus in all of his glory and splendor and wonder, with his dazzling robe, with his face shining like the sun. This is who Jesus truly is in his glory and splendor. And so they are reminded, and I want us to remember and apply to our lives as well, is that Jesus, we can get so used to him as, just walking along. Jesus is my friend. He's always there for me. He never leaves me. But Jesus is God. He is the Son of God. And picture him in his glorious form, where God the Father is the one where when you hear his voice, you have to face the ground because it's scary and you tremble in fear, and have that healthy respect about who God is. Remind yourself, this is God and this is Jesus, the Son of God. Be reminded of that. And then second, what applies to us, applied to the disciples, it applies to us as well, is listen to him. That God the Father is saying, Jesus is my son who I love, and you need to listen to what he says. And that applies to us. We read our Bibles and we know what Jesus says in our Bible. A lot of us have words of Jesus in red, so we know exactly what parts Jesus is talking about. We need to listen to what he says in our lives and sharing with others. Because God the Father is affirming this. We need to listen to what Jesus says. And how can we do that? Well, we have to start reading our Bible on a consistent basis and actually listening and then doing. Not just listening, going in one ear, coming out the other, but doing in our own life according to what Jesus has said. My name is Katie, and this is Mark chapter 9. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video so that I can keep sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with you. And thank you so much for watching.